How's the Epic fam today? Really? That's the best? I hopped off of a plane yesterday. I'm bringing everything I have to this moment. We're going to try that again. For the pastor who needs a little encouragement. Will, if you're sleeping while I'm teaching, you'll come up here and teach with me. How are you today? Okay. Every week on the calendar matters, but as Will just mentioned, there are some weeks that matter more, and today begins that week for us. Today begins that sacred week, that significant week, that extra special week, Holy Week. And what we are going to observe and reflect on and celebrate this week is exactly what our world needs today. Would you agree? What our world needs today is to know that there is an offer of redemption. There is an invitation to a life that brings living hope. And somehow there's the possibility that even the worst human tragedies can somehow end up good. But not only does the world need exactly what we're going to talk about and reflect on this week, I desperately need what we're going to do this week. And I believe, though I don't know everyone's story in this room, I know enough of your stories, and I've lived long enough, and I've been in touch with enough people just this week to know that what we're going to observe, reflect on, and celebrate this week is something that you deeply and desperately need too. And so I want to tell you a couple of things with that in mind. One thing for you and one thing for those that you care deeply about. For you, here's what I want to ask of us. And I think this is a healthy habit at all times, but why don't we just clear the deck this week? Why don't we create space on our calendars and then create space in our hearts and create space in our minds that we might take a little extra energy and a little extra time from some other things this week and just give ourselves to what God might want to show us this week and to the possibility that you might encounter or re-encounter a hope and a reality that is exactly not what your Easter once a year life needs, but what your everyday life needs. And I think the thing that you and I need is what everyone around us need. They may not have a desire to do church necessarily or to know about Jesus and all of those things, but everyone, I would say, in any part of the world right now is looking for hope. And the people around you, even if they seem like they have it all together, I believe that they could use the hope that we're going to talk about over this coming week. So yes, do yourself a favor, come through this self-guided experience. Listen, I know there are easier things than getting downtown on a weeknight. Can I get a witness? But I believe that if you give yourself space to walk through that this week, what our creatives have done, aren't you grateful for the artistic community here at Epic? So, yeah, everything that happens in this room from Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday is going to be put on. It's going to be like walking through an art gallery, but it's not just going to be, I don't know about you guys. You're probably way more comfortable in an art gallery than I am. I don't know what should be really exciting in this room or what shouldn't be. I'm not the museum type guy. A lot of you know that. But for this week, what I'm looking forward to and want to invite you into is a chance to reflect, to really look at these artistic pieces, be drawn in emotionally and mentally and at this deep heart level. I believe God will do something. And then on Friday, we will turn our attention to the cross. And Seth and the team will lead us in singing songs reflecting on what Jesus has done, what the cross means. We will be invited to that communion table, reflect on the Last Supper, and talk about what that meant for those disciples, what it means for us as modern-day disciples. And then Will is going to give a dynamic teaching. You'll not be jet-lagged by then. Will's going to give a dynamic teaching about not just the physical suffering, but the emotional suffering that Jesus went through on his worst day. And then he's going to make a connection from that terrible day for Jesus and what implications it has for your worst days. And then Sunday, I can't wait. My message is called Something to Live For. And every person on planet Earth, from the 2-year-old to the 102-year-old, is living for something. And I wonder if we might not need to be called out of something that we're living for and into someone who is giving us an eternal hope that will never die. And so I would encourage you to invite people on the front end of this week before they have plans. I plan on doing that. I was having a conversation with a neighbor yesterday. And he's telling me he needs to get back to Mass. And I was like, you can call what we do at Epic whatever you want, but I will be teaching the Easter message. And Father Ben works for me. I can't wait as long as I don't have to pay, alimony. I'm glad to invite. So I can't wait. I told him I would bring him an invitation this week, and it was a great conversation, and I'll be doing that this week. And I want to encourage you to do the same. But today we're wrapping up our series we've been calling Through the Fire on the life of Daniel, and here's what I'm wondering to begin this teaching. Is your ordinary life preparing you for extraordinary moments? Is your ordinary, daily, normal, mundane life preparing you for extraordinary moments? Does anyone besides me live for extraordinary moments? I mean, I don't know what it is, but I love extraordinary moments. I love making life a game. I love looking for the high point. I love the adrenaline fix. I love the dopamine hits. And I am always looking for really important, I'm trying to make the most of everything, right? I'm trying to figure out how can that plane ride yesterday, how can I get the most out of it, and I couldn't. But I'm always looking for those extraordinary moments. I think because I want to live a life that matters, I find myself on the daily searching for that moment or moments that are like magic. Anybody else? I want to live a life of consequence. So what I think that means is I can have no common or ordinary or normal, or God forbid, boring days. Does anybody feel that besides me? I mean, I've got to have something, I feel like, every single day. But what if the Instagram real life isn't supposed to be real life? What if most of our days are supposed to look something like this? What if we're supposed to wake up in the morning and before we roll out of bed, just say, God, thank you for another day? What if we are supposed to have a great cup of coffee? Anybody just drinking tea out there? Not because it's Lent and you gave up coffee, but because you like it? Anybody? So you have a great beverage, not of your choice, but the kind that you can have at 6 a.m. And you light a candle to remind yourself that God's presence is there with you. And perhaps you recite a psalm that means a lot to you. For me, one that I go to over and over and over again is Psalm 131, which simply says this: my heart is not proud, Lord. My eyes are not haughty. I do not concern myself with great matters or things too wonderful for me, but I have calmed and quieted myself. I am like a weaned child with its mother. Like a weaned child, I am content. And then maybe you pray for others in your life and in our city and in the world, and you wake your kids up and you make them breakfast, and maybe you take them to school or you call a friend, and then you get to the office and you just have a good day of work. Nothing's really supernatural. Nothing miraculous happens at the office. You go home, you walk the dog. While you're walking the dog, you have a positive exchange with a neighbor. You come back, and either with your spouse or your kids or your roommates, you make dinner and you eat and drink with glad and sincere hearts, and then you play a board game because the world's so heavy. So let's play a board game. Unless you're like me, you're uber competitive, and so that just brings more heaviness if you lose the board game that you're playing. And then you lie down on your pillow and you just write in a short journal entry, here are the 3 things I'm grateful for that happened today. What if that's supposed to be the normal life? What if I'm not meant to live for these incredible highs? I don't know about you, but when I read about my favorite Bible characters throughout history, tell me if you do this. I'm really interested because this is how I perceive them. I think that their lives must have been amazing every single day. Anyone else? I think, because we know such extraordinary events that happened in their lives, I think that every day was here's a miracle, there's a miracle, everywhere's a miracle, right? I just think that was what they experienced. One supernatural moment after supernatural moment. But guys, that wasn't at all how it went down. That's not how it happened. The people of God at times went centuries between when they heard God's voice and when they heard God's voice again. Moses, extraordinary leader. The 10 Commandments flow from God's heart into Moses, and he shares with everyone. He leads the nation of Israel out of their slavery after 400 years, some 2 million or so slaves. An extraordinary life. But what about the 40 years he spent tending sheep in Midian? You think that was extraordinary? One dumb sheep after another dumb sheep. One mundane day after another mundane day. But you tell me this. Did God use those formative years in Midian with the sheep to prepare him for what he was going to do one day? And if you're in church and somebody says, hey, who did this or who did that? The answer is, What about the life of Jesus? 3 years on earth that were action-packed, yeah? Right? What about those first 30 years of obscurity? Because we don't have much from his childhood except for his birth, and that time he ghosted his parents at age 12. Let's just imagine what those days looked like. During those days, there's no fanfare. During those days, he's getting up and he's having breakfast, and he's going, perhaps from historical understanding, he's going to make some furniture or just continue on the piece that he started yesterday, probably with his father and maybe his brothers. And then he's coming home, and he's Jesus, so surely he was helping out with dinner, at least setting the table or doing the dishes. And he's closing out his day under the stars, praying a prayer of gratitude to God. Do you think what he did during those 30 days prepared him for the extraordinary moments that would come in his future? Do you think that what you do on your mundane, ordinary, normal, common, God forbid, boring days is preparing you for yours? They are. Those days are preparing you for the extraordinary moments. Like what if most of our days are supposed to just be normal? And those normal days are preparing us for the days that aren't so normal. Those days when the Spirit of God speaks a prophetic word right to our hearts. He says something to us, and from that moment, we know that we've heard God somehow. Maybe it wasn't audible, or maybe it was, or maybe we were discerning something, and the answer came, and it was like this extraordinary, powerful moment. Or maybe the day was extraordinary because you came face to face with some massive testing of your faith, and you knew that what you had been doing for the last 365 days either prepared you for that moment or it didn't. And so what I want to do today is give a message to conclude what has been a fantastic series. Because when we think about Daniel's life, we think, even if you've not been a part of this series, when you hear about Daniel's life, what do you think? What are the images that come to mind of the stories? The lion's den. Why don't we go there today? What else? Fire. Anything else? Huh? Royalty. There's a lot happening there. But sometimes because we know the high points of his extraordinary moments, we forget that he had an ordinary life that shaped who he was, so that when the ordinary or became extraordinary, he was ready for the moment. And that's my hope today. I'm calling this message as we conclude this series, Ordinary Formation for Extraordinary Moments. Stand with me. Let's look at Daniel chapter 6. Daniel chapter 6, verses 1 through 11. It pleased Darius to appoint 120 satraps to rule throughout the kingdom, with 3 administrators over them, one of whom was Daniel. The satraps were made accountable to them so that the king might not suffer loss. Now Daniel so distinguished himself among the administrators and the satraps by his exceptional qualities that the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. At this, the administrators and the satraps tried to find grounds for charges against Daniel in his conduct of government affairs, but they were unable to do so. They could find no corruption in him because he was trustworthy and neither corrupt nor negligent. Finally, these men said, "We will never find any basis for charges against this man Daniel unless it has something to do with the law of his God." So these administrators and satraps went as a group to the king and said, "May King Darius live forever." The royal administrators, prefects, satraps, advisors, and governors have all agreed that the king should issue an edict and enforce the decree that anyone who prays to any god or human being during the next 30 days, except to you, your majesty, shall be thrown into the lion's den. Now, your majesty, issue the decree and put it in writing so that it cannot be altered, in accordance with the law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be repealed. So King Darius put the decree in writing. Now, when Daniel learned that the decree had been published, he went home to his upstairs room where the windows opened toward Jerusalem. 3 times a day, he got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to his God, just as he had done before. Verse 11, we'll close out here. Then these men went as a group and found Daniel praying and asking God for help. Again, the question today is your ordinary life preparing you for extraordinary moments? You may be seated. At the end of Daniel chapter 5, Darius has become king. Darius is a Mede, and he is now the king, and he's 62 years old when he begins to reign. And we know that Daniel has at least worked for and served under the leadership of 3 kings. Anybody remember the three kings so far? Nebuchadnezzar, obvious. Belshazzar, and now he is serving under King Darius. And Darius notices in Daniel what every one of the kings has noticed about Daniel. There's something special about that guy. There's something, we've got the best of the best in this cohort of young men, right, who've come from Jerusalem in exile. We brought them over here. They're the best of the best, but even amongst the best of the best, Daniel really stands out. And he stands out so much that Darius decides to, anybody been through a reorg lately at your company? Or is the company you no longer work for maybe going through a reorg that maybe we're just bringing levity, but we're praying for everyone in our community who is struggling with unemployment issues right now. So know that, and we're glad to help and connect any way that we can. So he decides to restructure things, and the way he wants to restructure it is there's 120 satraps. He doesn't want to have that many direct reports, so he is going to put 3 administrators over the 120 satraps. Now, a satrap is someone who served under the king and oversaw a province or provinces in the Babylonian kingdom. So he pulls 3 individuals over those 120. Daniel's one of those 3, but depending on your perspective, it either gets better or worse from there, and it gets to the point where Daniel is now going to be put in charge of the entire kingdom. Now, why did Darius want to put Daniel in charge of the entire kingdom? It's because he so stood out. Now, Daniel didn't distinguish himself by trying to compare to other people. He wasn't trying to play the game of a superiority complex. It's just his work ethic and his character caused Daniel to stand out. And I've got to ask you this question. What, if anything, distinguishes you from everyone around you? And you're like, I don't know, the way I dress, like no one dresses like me. How early I get to the office, that might have something to do with it. What, if anything, distinguishes you from everyone around you? Now, this is not about you being better than anyone else, right? So it's not like, in pride, you begin to think, oh, yeah, here's all the things that make me so better and so different. But what is it about the way that you interact? What is it about your work ethic that might stand out or might not stand out? What is it about the way you treat people above you, beside you, and below you? What are the things in your life? Think about this. If the Spirit of God is alive in you, and if you are being formed into the image of Jesus, shouldn't something stand out about your life? There's a chance that something should stand out about your life. Now, one of the things I want to make sure we really speak into, because I find it challenging myself with what I'm about to teach you, Daniel is still giving it his best all these years later. Don't miss this. This is really, really important point. There are people, whether you talk about their faith life, their vocational work life, their marriage, they like the first decade or two, they were bringing it. You ever been around those people? And it was so inspiring, but something happens. Maybe it's the midlife crisis, maybe it's something else, but over time, what happens is they worked hard to get this great position, but now they're just coasting, aren't they? And what I love is that when Darius shows up, and Daniel's been in this mode of operating this way for quite a long time, he's still bringing his best. When you see Daniel here, like he's on his 3rd king, and he's not coasting, he's not phoning it in, he's not resting on his past accomplishments, and unlike me sometimes, he is not daydreaming about retirement. Typically, I only do that on Mondays. He's giving it all that he has. And because he's stood out, Darius puts him in charge, and every other leader is upset about this. Now, you may not be asked to oversee an entire kingdom, but you should know this principle. God isn't the only one with a plan for your life. You will always face opposition to the life God is calling you to live. We talk a lot, as we should, and you hear this from me a lot. God has a plan for your life. God has a plan for your life. But have you ever met anyone else who has a plan for your life? You will always face, I believe, internal in you and external out there opposition to the life God is calling you to live. And Daniel faces it. And it says as they began to look for something wrong with Daniel, they could find no corruption in Daniel. He was trustworthy. He was not negligent. Let me ask you this question. Do people you work with have trouble finding any corruption in you? My coworkers are present. All of yours aren't, but this isn't about the people you and I work with thinking that we're perfect, but it is about them knowing that we're going to bring our best every day from a work ethics standpoint. It is about them observing how we treat other people. They know that we will not do the immoral thing no matter what it would mean for the bottom line. They know that we don't have a habit of talking negatively about our spouse or about our children. They know that about us. They cannot find any corruption in us. And so these jealous leaders, they begin to think the only way we're going to find something wrong with Daniel is if it has to do with the law of his God. Isn't that fascinating? Now, Daniel is not the guy on Market Street with the bullhorn. He's bringing it every day. So much so, he's doing so, like this is really important, and we could have a long discussion. He is causing the Babylonian kingdom or empire to flourish. That's why he gets promoted. You know that, right? So he's not over here just praying and doing Bible study. He is not over here with a megaphone condemning every other person in the kingdom who doesn't share his faith. He is bringing it, though, to such a degree, and they all know why. Isn't that fascinating? Everyone knows Daniel's God is someone that Daniel is crazy devoted to. Daniel's God, Daniel follows him with his whole heart. He's devoted. So if we're going to find something wrong with him, we've checked out for corruption, no corruption. If there's an issue for Daniel, it's got to be something related to his God, because everyone around that kingdom knew that Daniel cares more about being devoted to his God even than doing good work here in Babylon. What do they know about you? Is your faith in Jesus apparent to those around you? Because Daniel's faith really stood out. Again, not in an awkward way. So we've got to figure out how do we bring that on the daily with who we are and where we are, and not in a contentious way, but in a way that affects our character, in a way that everyone knows. Like, I mean, is it possible? Imagine the future of the Epic Church community, that when you're crushing it out there in your work, your vocation, whatever company or organization that you work for, imagine that people know the only way they're going to find trouble with you is if it has something to do with your Christian faith. And then you realize, like Daniel had Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, you have each other. Isn't there an incredible courage that comes when you realize that what you're living out is what she's living out and what he's living out in the place where you work? And guys, this is where we've begun to see movement here in our Epic Church community through a variety of places where you are going, and you're not keeping your faith at home. You're not keeping your faith on Sunday. You're bringing that faith Monday, Tuesday, and beyond. That begins to stand out. So they get everyone together. You know how this is, right? Anybody work for a company where there's a meeting before the meeting at every meeting? Come on. Same. Even right here at Epic Church, meetings before the meetings. I like those when I'm the one calling them. When I'm not invited, I'm like, guy should have told me. So these guys have the meeting before the meeting. They have a meeting so that when they come to Darius, they're trying. You know how it is when you're trying to load up consensus, right? They're trying to load up consensus, and they're like, "Hey, Darius, we've all talked." Like for them, they've been throughout the empire. They say all the governors, all the prefects, all of the satraps, this is 100% in unison. We all know there's a problem, so we're bringing the problem to you. And here's what we think. We were just kind of sitting around. We thought, you know what? No one deserves worship like you, Darius. So why don't you do this? Why don't you write up a decree? Why don't you issue an edict? And in that edict, just say that if there's any person who chooses to worship any god or another human being besides you, King Darius, they should be thrown into the lion's den. Now listen closely. Darius thought the world of Daniel, but he's been manipulated into doing something that's going to end in Daniel's death. Well, what does Daniel do when he finds out? Daniel goes home and he never prays again. Can I tell you how we might play this? This came to me just this morning because I was up early. The edict said, you just can't pray to any God for the next 30 days. You know how a lot of us would have played this? I can go without prayer for 30 days. Hey, I'm going to just keep to myself. And when 30 days is up, the edict will expire. And then I'll throw my windows back open. And then I'll re-engage my faith. And then they'll know that I'm back once again to being devoted to my God above everything else. But that's not what Daniel does. Can we get verse 10 back on the screen? I want to read this to you. I want to ask you a question before I get into reading this verse. And the question is this: which of these phrases in verse 10 do you think is the most important phrase in all of verse 10? I'll read it to you, and then we'll just walk through. There's a lot of important stuff. Now, when Daniel learned that the decree had been published, he went home to his upstairs room where the windows opened toward Jerusalem. 3 times a day, he got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to his God, just as he had done before. Let me tell you, there's some really important phrases in here. The first phrase is that he opens his windows towards Jerusalem. That's important, but it's not the most important phrase in verse 10. The fact that he prays 3 times a day, we get a little insight into the frequency of his prayer life. And just so you know, there's this common ancient practice, and a lot of people are picking it back up these days, kind of this prayer time that is morning, noonday, and evening prayer. There's a lot about that. You can go to the Lectio, Lectio 365 app. That's been super helpful with a morning and evening prayer there. But that's not what's most important. It's not that he prayed 3 times a day. It's not most important. Like, posture is really important. It can help us. When our body is informing our soul about our prayer life, that can be helpful. But the fact that Daniel is on his knees, that's not the most important thing I see in verse 10. The fact that he gives thanks to God, I believe gratitude is a practice that will reframe our perspective. If we do it very faithfully, I think it will change literally our brain chemistry. I think that's true. But that's not what's most important. Do you know what's most important in this verse? It's the last phrase. Give it to me. Just as he had done before. Friends, listen closely. Daniel had a pattern, a rhythm, a way of life that formed him on the ordinary days long before he comes face to face with these extraordinary moments. He had a way. And there's no way, to know where this started, we've got to at least go back to where our series began, March 5th. I know it's been a while, but Daniel chapter 1, verse 8, I think that's the crux of the whole story for Daniel. But Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and the wine. He asked for permission that he would not have to defile himself in this way. Daniel had decided a long time ago what kind of person he was going to be. So many of us are keeping our options open, and we're like, well, if the upside is high enough, I will give up my character. I will give up my integrity. I will not just go the distance with my faith. But Daniel is not playing the keeping my options open game. Long ago, he decided, I am going to be in with God. Whatever comes as a result of it, I'm good with it. He resolved a long time ago. There was a pattern to Daniel's life. There is a pattern to my life. And there's a pattern to your life. So let me ask you, what is the pattern of your life? Definition of pattern is the repeated or regular way in which something happens or is done. What are the things that are getting repeated on your ordinary days? What is your regular way of life? Daniel cannot do what he does in chapter 6 unless he did what he did in chapter 1. Listen to me, this is really important, especially for people like me who live for the moment, those extraordinary moments. So what a lot of us think is, I'm going when the moment comes, I'm going to up my game. Listen, Daniel did not have a faith-filled moment. He lived a faith-filled life. Daniel didn't get up for the moment. He got up when there were no cameras, when there were no kings, when there was no work to be done in the kingdom. And as a young man, he decided, I don't know what God's going to do with my life. Who could have known? None of us know what God might choose, when he might choose to exalt us or put us in a different position. Daniel didn't know that, but he knew that if his life was being formed most by God, that would be sufficient for his life. He did not have a faith-filled moment. He lived a faith-filled life. How are you currently being formed so that you can make it through whatever is coming for you? Because you can't catch up in the moment. How are you currently being formed? Let's just ask some of these questions. What are the inputs? What are the environments? Who are the people that you're letting deeply into your life? What are you doing with your body? What are you doing with your mind? What are you doing with your affections? What are you doing with your phone? It's interesting, and I'm really trying to wrestle through this. I'm having conversations with a few people on this trip. Man, we can't live without our phones, and I don't need any emails on that. I'm just making a statement. I know it's possible. I just don't want to try it. But it's crazy, right? Your phone, my phone, it is forming us, right? With the same phone, I can open the YouVersion app and read every Bible translation in the world. And with the same phone, I can have my brain chemistry rewired because of how much I look at pornography. With the same phone, I can call anyone in the world, and we can see each other. Amazing, right? And with that phone, I can just search and scroll endlessly until I can no longer give my attention to my wife or my kids or my work. John Mark Comer says it this way: how do you pray, read the scriptures, sit under a teaching at church, or rest well on the Sabbath when every chance you get, you reach for the dopamine dispenser that is your phone? Again, the question for us is not, am I being formed? You are being formed. The question is, by what? By who? By how much of it? Some things need to go completely from our lives. A lot of other things, guys, they just need to be limited, and that's where the problem comes in, right? I mean, even think about, this thing that hits me for whatever reason. I don't know if yours does, but mine comes at the 9:30 service every week, my screen time usage, which is great. It's great. And we should probably work on some of that. But that just tells me how many hours. It doesn't tell me if I was listening to a podcast that built me up and gave me tools for leading Epic Church in the future, right? Paul said it this way to express his deep desire, and I realize women in the room who've had children, you may want to argue with Paul, so I'll just leave it there. Here's what he said. My dear children, Galatians 4:19, for whom I am again in the pains of childbirth. And the ladies want to tell Paul, bro, there's a lot of other images you could have used and we would have believed you. We're not sure you know. We know you were shipwrecked and beaten and all that, but come on, man. That's when people told me during February, they're like, women told me like, hey, Ben, I've had this many children and shingles was worse than having children. I did not like high five and go, yeah, you're right. But Paul writes again, my dear children, for whom I am again in the pains of childbirth, until Christ is formed in you. You know what the beautiful news about that is? It can happen for every one of us. Isn't that good? You know what the challenging news is for us? It's not automatic for any of us. Doesn't matter your age, doesn't matter if you're the pastor, doesn't matter how long you've been following Jesus, doesn't matter what was true 2 years ago about your formation. It is not a guarantee. But I care deeply, and our team cares deeply, and we want you to care deeply about your formation, and we want to advocate for our own formation. And here's what you have to know. Much of spiritual formation comes down to what we detach from and what we attach to. So I want you to close your eyes. I just want to lead you through an exercise around detachment and attachment. Say a couple of things, and then I'm done. As I roll through the things that you might need to detach from and attach to, one image that's helpful for me is just like, think about Velcro. Think about what you need to pull away from your life, from your mind, from your soul, from your heart, from your calendar. And then think about the things you need to Velcro to your mind, your life, your calendar, your time, your energy. What do you need to detach from? What do you need to attach to? Probably a lot of us need to detach from constant noise and attach to probably some silence and solitude. Isaiah 30:15 says, in quietness and trust is your strength. Perhaps all of us in some form need to detach from a self-absorbed life and attach to a life of loving and serving others, especially those who can do nothing for us. We take in information every day, which is fine to some degree, but we also take information about ourselves. And some of us, what we need to detach from are the lies we've believed. They came internally within us, or they came externally from someone else. We need to detach from those, and then we need to Velcro ourselves to the truth that Jesus promised that if we know the truth would set us free. I think we need to detach from a life that's paralyzed by fear, and we need to attach ourselves to the love of God that drives out all fear. Look at me for a moment. What I'm convinced of today, with all my heart, is that Jesus wants you to be his disciple. He wants you to be his student. He wants you to be his follower. He wants you, as we say in our vision statement here, to orient your entire life around him. But you need to know that you are something's or someone's disciple already. And if you want to know, like, hey, Ben, how would I even know who I'm following? I know who I'm following by who is most forming me. By what is most forming me. I care deeply for you. God cares even more for you. And here's the really good news. While we have some responsibility in applying today's message, we don't have to wonder, like, if I make myself available to Jesus, will he really form me? He really will. Paul said it this way to the Philippians. I'm confident of this, that he who began a good work in you will carry it on to completion. What is he saying? The one who started the process in you, he will bring about your full formation. Don't you want that? And it doesn't matter how young you are or how old you are or what you did 10 years ago or what you did this weekend. It is available to you, but it's not automatic, which means it's not guaranteed. Would you guys stand as I pray for us and just ask God to move in our midst? We're headed towards Easter, and we're praying for some great moments this week, and I believe that you will have some. But the implications of Easter, those will still be here in July. Aren't you glad? They'll still be here when Christmas comes. They're going to be here whether the stock market does what you want it to do this year. They're going to be here even if your kid didn't get into the school that you wanted them to get into. They're going to be here even if you are one of the people who's been laid off. The promises of Easter are still going to be here. And there's a pattern to your life. There's a pattern to Daniel's life. If you don't love what the repeated or regular way of life as it's going for you now, then we get invited into the promise of I don't even know where we're going with this now, but Romans chapter 12, do not be conformed any longer to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. The invitation, I think, that the Spirit of God is speaking to us now. And by the way, this altar will be open as we pray and as we sing and respond. Here's what I believe. The Spirit of God's whispering to your heart right now, I think many of you, there's a different way. there's a new pattern available. There's a new process. What has been forming you for a year or decades no longer has to form you. There is another way. And so, Spirit of God, would you come and give us a new way? We repent of our lives that, if we're honest, self-included, we have not been as faith-filled on the daily as Daniel was. We have not been prepared. So when COVID came, God, a lot of us realized, like, I wasn't prepared for this. I wasn't formed. I didn't have the foundation to carry me through this. And God, I don't know what's ahead for us. God, our individual lives, our families, our church, God, this city, the world, God, it is a dark place right now. God, we don't know what we will face. But would you form us on the daily, God? Could we give our Monday mornings and our Thursday afternoons and our Saturday nights to the kinds of things that would help us be ready for whatever is ahead? In your name we pray, Jesus. Amen. The altar's open. You can come for prayer. If you need someone to pray over you, we're available to do that.